And we cannot single-handedly control history. However, we owe it to ourselves and to our children to do our best to stand up for what is true and right.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Grey Matter, and a special welcome to our new friends on Merit TV in the United States and Canada. Well, it seems as though every day that goes by, a new story breaks, making it more and more clear that just about all of the misinformation, disinformation, and outright lies were not being perpetrated by the people who were opposing what the government was saying and doing, or what mass media was saying and doing, but was actually being perpetrated by the people who were there to help us and to give us the truth. One of the people who's been there from the very beginning on the front lines in terms of fighting all of this is John Carpay of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. And he's here today to talk about a new book that he has published. It's called Corrupted by Fear: How the Charter Was Betrayed and What Canadians Can Do About It. It was released very recently as an ebook, and it's available on Amazon. We're going to provide all the links so you can get the book. But John, welcome to Grey Matter. I'm looking forward to this conversation about your book.
I'm glad to be with you, Leighton.
So John, we want to talk about the book, but I thought as kind of a segue into that, if you wouldn't mind, you wrote a really interesting piece recently entitled A Glaring Double Standard. This was published, I think, about a week ago, talking about what's happening with the investigation and determination of deaths from COVID. I wonder if you wouldn't mind talking about that piece a little bit before we dive into your book.
Well, you see a lot of big COVID numbers in the news because we're in mid-March, so we're right around the 5th anniversary of lockdowns, which in a lot of places was March 15th, but 13th, 16th, whatever. We're at the 5-year anniversary, and I'm of lockdowns, and I'm reading some of these different analyses. Everybody's stepping up to the plate with their, what can we learn, and 5th anniversary. So a lot of interesting things to read. But you see these high. This morning I was reading, 55,000 Canadians died of COVID. Another estimate cited in the media: 65,000 Canadians died of COVID. And the truth is, the number is a lot lower than that, because what the governments did in 2020 was they used PCR testing to come up with numbers of COVID cases, COVID deaths, COVID hospitalizations. And the PCR test cannot and does not diagnose COVID. That's not a conspiracy theory. You can find it on the website of Health Canada, provincial public health agencies. The PCR test can detect a remnant of a virus in your body, whether it's COVID or staph infection or whatever. It doesn't tell you if you're sick or not. And so in one of our court cases that's referenced in the book, we had a Manitoba government official in the court proceedings admit under oath that when the Manitoba government was saying that there was 1,000 new COVID cases, in fact, they knew that at least 400 of those 1,000 people were not sick with COVID, not spreading COVID, and yet they were still ordered to quarantine. So we had this daily fear-mongering using PCR testing, which does not diagnose COVID disease. And combine that with a change in 2020, April, the World Health Organization adopted a new cause of death classification protocol. In a nutshell, prior in 2019 and years prior, if you were terminally ill with cancer, and if you got a really bad flu and the flu pushed you over the edge and killed you, for government statistics purposes, your death would be recorded as a cancer death, not a flu death. In 2020, and again, not a conspiracy theory, you can find this on the World Health Organization's own website. In April 2020, the World Health Organization said, well, for counting COVID deaths, if you are terminally ill with cancer, but if a PCR test finds a COVID viral remnant in your body, and then when you die, it's counted as a COVID death. And unless you got killed in a car accident, although even then, we'll still do a PCR test. And if we find COVID in your body, it's a COVID death. So they bent over backwards to get as many COVID deaths as possible. And the double standard is that with the vaccine, it's just the opposite approach.
Hmm. Well, this is a fascinating read, and it also points to something that uh, is probably the guiding theme of your book. In fact, you put it right in the title, and that is fear. The book is called Corrupted by Fear: How the Charter Was Betrayed and What Canadians Can Do About It. The book itself, the central theme, John, appears to be a critique of how fear, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, led to the erosion of rights enshrined in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And you do an excellent job in this book of describing how that fear was weaponized. You want to talk about that a little bit, and also in the context of why, given all the other work that you've done, I mean, you've been working tirelessly over the past 5 years in this space in terms of combating government misinformation and abuse about COVID, why you thought it was important to write this book at this time.
When I was speaking publicly, I live in Calgary, but once a month I'm in, Vancouver or Saskatoon, Toronto, whatever. When I'm at public meetings, I always get asked, "What's up with these judges?" The governments have come into court. They've typically admitted in court that yes, their health orders do violate one or more of our fundamental freedoms of conscience, religion, expression, association, peaceful assembly. Governments generally, they've admitted that. And then the judge says, yeah, but that's okay. These health orders are justifiable violations. And I've been asked, are the judges getting thick wads of $100 bills? Are they getting threatening phone calls from, Prime Minister Trudeau or Premier Jason Kenney? Are they getting threatening emails from Klaus Schwab in the World Economic Forum? And my answer is no, no, and no. I don't believe that's going on. But there is corruption by fear affects everybody, all Canadians, but also the medical profession, the legal profession, the judiciary, the political class, the media. There is the false claims by Neil Ferguson, March 2020, 5 years ago, that COVID would be as bad as the Spanish flu of 1918. Tens of millions of people would die. Everybody would be threatened. Jason Kenney and Dina Hinshaw in Alberta said that over 32,000 Albertans could die of COVID. Which is just insane. I mean, that's higher than the total number of deaths of all causes. And so, and then the media peddled this fear every hour of every day for weeks and months and years. And so my thesis is the judges were corrupted by fear. Therefore, they were very keen to write the media narrative into their court rulings, even when their judgments are not supported by the evidence that was submitted before the court.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And this is part of the reason why what you say in the book, I don't want to oversimplify it, is that really the Charter failed us. The Charter didn't work the way we would have expected it to during something like a pandemic, when government decided to encroach upon what we thought were guaranteed, entrenched constitutional freedoms. I'm curious to know, though, John, if you could cast your mind back to, let's say, January or February of 2020, would you have predicted that the courts would have behaved in the way that you describe in your book?
No. And by the way, I disagree. I don't think the Charter failed us. I think it was the judges who are required as part of their job description to look at the evidence. We had one judge in Ontario, and I elaborate on this in the book. She actually said, I am neither equipped nor inclined to resolve scientific controversies regarding COVID-19. It's astounding. And then, because in 2019, if you or I had said that about a judge, well, this judge is neither equipped nor inclined to resolve scientific controversies, you would have had a law society complaint or something. Like, it's like, how dare you say that about a judge? That is so insulting. And here the judge says it about herself. And then in your case, in Ingram, which you got a successful outcome, Justice Barbara Romaine copies this. She says, I am neither equipped nor inclined to resolve scientific controversies. It's like, but this is what a judge's job is to resolve scientific controversies, because if it's a medical malpractice or a criminal law case, civil litigation, how the car accident happened, why the building collapsed, why somebody died. All of these, if family law, you always get competing experts, and you've got a judge who might not have a science degree or engineering degree, doctor's degree. He or she resolves scientific controversies and rules in favor of the plaintiff or the defendant, or rules for the crown or for the accused, etc. And here we just have this, and the lowering of the standard is just frightening. This same judge, Renee Pomerantz in Ontario, recently promoted to the to the Ontario Court of Appeal. You see that the judges don't require, as they would have prior to 2020, they don't require the government to produce cogent and persuasive evidence and have the governments prove on a balance of probabilities. The onus should be on the government to prove their case. And here they just lowered the standard and said, well, the government only needs to show, was it open to the government to do what it did? Which is just a total lowering of standards.
And what's even more frustrating, I would think, is that the Justice Center went out and procured perhaps the most eminent expert in the world, certainly in North America, on epidemiology. That's Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who's now, I believe he's been confirmed to very high office in the U.S. government now, under RFK Jr.'s health regime. So you produced evidence, copious quantities of evidence from eminent scientific experts, and yet even then the judges simply would not look at it and take it seriously. And more than that, they actually permitted the Alberta government to conduct a character assassination in open court in the case of Dr. Bhattacharya. This is all very, very shocking, isn't it? And it's sort of symptomatic of the problem that you're talking about, this corruption by fear.
Well, what the other frightening thing from these court rulings is that the judges, I have not found, and to my knowledge, there is no Canadian court ruling that upheld lockdowns or vaccine passports in which the judge actually explains why he or she thought that the government's evidence was superior, because it is open to the courts, it's open to the judges to say, you know what, I've looked at the government's evidence, I've looked at the evidence brought forward by people like Mrs. Ingram, like citizens who are challenging the violation of their charter freedoms. I've looked at the evidence, and let me tell you why and how the government's evidence is more persuasive. It's open to the court to come up with that outcome, and we don't see it in the Ingram case in Alberta. The government's evidence is more persuasive, so I rule in favor of the government. Okay, why? You can go through the entire ruling and there's no explanation. And it's the same with the Gateway ruling, which is very lengthy. The Gateway judgment is it's almost the size of a short book. He goes on and on and on. He even enumerates a lot of the evidence of Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He explains what it is. He explains what the government says. And then he says several times, he says, I accept the government's evidence. And he never says why. There's no explanation. And he disregards, there was an expert witness in the Gateway case, Dr. Joel Kettner, former chief medical officer of the province of Manitoba, wrote a scathing report that was a devastating takedown of lockdowns. Now, again, it was open to the judge to say, well, I read Dr. Kettner's report, and here's why Dr. Kettner is wrong. And then tear the report apart and say, I'm ruling in favor of the government. What does he do? He ignores completely Dr. Kettner's report. You will not find it mentioned in the Gateway ruling. So this is really bad stuff. I would say if for listeners and viewers, if you were for lockdowns and vaccine passports, you should be very worried about the state of the judiciary, because they're effectively, they were rubber stamping when they should have really done their work and explained why they ruled in the government's favor.
You drew an important distinction earlier. I'm glad you did that. When I was talking about the charter failing us, what you're really saying then is it's not so much the law. The law isn't the problem. It's the way that it's being interpreted and applied by courts that is incorrect. and actually, contrary to law. And that is being caused by, and that ties into your thesis, that this is being caused by this corruption of fear. One of the interesting things about your book that's different from many that I've read so far about COVID is that you place the pandemic in an interesting historical context. You talk about uh, how really, in a way, what we experienced was a modern application of fascism, of fascist principles. And I know that you are a student of history, and so you actually take this and put it into an interesting uh, context, I believe, in the final chapter, which is entitled "Defeating Modern Fascism." Do you want to talk about that a little bit and sort of put tie those two things together the way you do in the book?
The first quarter of the book, approximately, the first section is about German history in the 1930s, how the National Socialists acquired power, how they exercised power, and how they used fear so effectively. People had a legitimate fear of communism. They had seen how terrible communism was in Russia or the Soviet Union. Churches burned, way more people sent to Siberia than what the czars had ever done, and just the tyranny, the brutality, murderous genocidal regime. And so the Germans were legitimately fearful of communism, and the communists in Germany had as much as 17% of the vote, which is pretty high. It's not like Marxist-Leninist candidate in Canada that gets 10th place with 29 votes or something. I mean, this was a serious political party. Germans were
Mm-hmm.
afraid of it. And so Hitler and the National Socialists said, we're the best ones to defeat communism. And they were the most popular party in Germany. But after seizing power, they continued to use fear of communism for the next 12 years. It was always, we're in imminent danger of getting taken over by the communists. They kept on saying this for 12 years. And so there's a short chapter on the common characteristics of fascism, and they include, it's a long list, but a few of them are the state gets the entire population on a crusade to fight one evil, and that evil, everybody has to make that their top priority in life. And it's a hatred of the classical liberal tradition with our freedoms of conscience, religion, speech. It's the idea that the entire population has to get to work on a project, and we all have to defer to experts. And
Mm.
another interesting parallel too is that the National Socialists, they said their policies were scientific, and in fact they had university professors and academics that said, oh yeah, the science of the races, and there are superior races, and the science of eugenics, we got to kill or at least sterilize all the handicapped people. That was scientific policy, and if you disagreed with that, you were not following the science. So then a lot of this was replayed in the last 5 years, where you have this incessant fear mongering, and you have the removal of our rights and freedoms, and you have the politicians defer to so-called experts, and we're told every day that we all got to get on board with this big project. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of parallels.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you talk about in the book is um, the need for Canadians, and this is something that I know in talking to you privately that you mentioned a lot, and that happened during COVID. There's a need for private citizens to rally, that to really walk out these rights, and not to just look to the JCCF or court cases to uphold these rights. And this is something that, as a society, we've sort of failed ourselves. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, there's three proverbs that say similar things. There's Edmund Burke, who said the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. The other one that I love is an old French proverb that says, if you don't do politics, then politics will be done unto you. And the third one, from Plato's Republic, paraphrase, not a perfect quote, but those who choose to not be involved in the democratic process will suffer the consequence of being governed by their inferiors. And so
Mm.
all three proverbs point to citizen engagement, citizen involvement. We cannot we cannot kind of sit back and hope that things will get better. But when citizens roll up their sleeves and become involved, federally, provincially, municipally, school board level, it's great to see what the results are. I mean, in Alberta, where you and I live, we saw a freedom movement remove Jason Kenney from office and replace him with Danielle Smith. And that was done by freedom-minded Albertans who got involved in the political process, took out a membership in a political party, and exercised their voting rights as party members. And so it's up to us, really. Dr. Jordan Peterson said once, slaves need, no, tyrants need slaves in order to rule. And slaves look to tyrants for leadership and guidance. And there's this very sick relationship. So we can choose to not be the slaves who are saying, oh, I want a sense of meaning and purpose, and I want to be told what to do and what to think and how to live. If that's the kind of people we are, we will end up being ruled by tyrants. But if we
Mhm.
are awake and assume responsibility for our lives and assume responsibility for what is going on politically in our country, then we're not going to be ruled over by tyrants.
Mhm. This is one of the key messages of the book, too, isn't it? And you talk about you identify some of the problems that are with the judiciary, problems in the way that the governments certainly addressed what was called the COVID-19 pandemic. You talk about some of the lasting implications of that for society, but you also offer some solutions, some ways to prevent this from ever happening again. And you just mentioned one of them, citizen engagement, but you have some other ideas about how to prevent this type of deprivation of liberty from happening again. Do you want to cover those a little bit, because I think this is an important aspect of the book that actually differentiates it from some of the other books that really only talk about problems.
Well, in no particular order of importance, but parents need to care not only for the bodies of their children, but for their minds, their souls, their spirits as well. If your kids are going to a school where your son is getting told that he might be a girl, or he could be a girl, or he could become a girl if he wanted to, if this is the garbage, the destructive, dangerous ideology that's being presented to children, take your kids out of that school, homeschool them, put them in private school. And I know that's asking for a lot. I know there's lower income families, and mom and dad are both working, and it's hard. But we really have to protect the minds, souls, and spirits of our children. That's extremely important. We have to educate ourselves. We need to support independent media like the Rebel and True North, the Epoch Times, the Western Standard, and Counter Signal. So many of these groups, give them their $10 a month, $12 a month, $8 a month to keep them in business, because they are educating the public and getting the other side out, and putting forward things that you will never find on the government-funded media. The other big one is to practice courage by speaking truth to power. Related to that, don't be intimidated by name calling. The moment somebody starts calling you racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, hateful, misogynist, anti-science, the moment that they start calling you names, I know it hurts, it stings. You and I have Leighton. You and I have thick skins, but most people don't. So I know it's hard, but in a way, it's a compliment. The person who's calling you a name is admitting that they do not have an intelligent argument against your position. So when you hear the name calling start, it's like, okay, I've won the debate. They don't have something intelligent to say to refute my argument. But it does take courage to persist through that, because I know for most people don't have rhinoceros skin, and it's really hard, right? When somebody starts calling you racist, sexist, other things, it's very, very debilitating. But we got to move through that and keep on speaking the truth, and then persevere with that over time. And that's one of the necessary things for turning the country around.
Hmm. John, we've known each other for about 5 years, or I've known you for about 5 years. I don't know you extremely well, but if I was going to have to describe you in 2 words, one of them would be fearless, which is interesting because you've written a book about fear. But I'd also describe you as someone who's faithful. You're very loyal to your causes. You're loyal to the people whom you work with, and so I'm interested to know. You said that you're thick-skinned, and I know that's true. But obviously, you have a very deep, abiding faith, and that comes through in everything that you've done. I mean, you've been fighting these battles on the front lines at tremendous personal cost. You've really endured a lot. But what comes through in your book, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, but there's a sort of faith, a sense of faith that is in your book. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, or if you wouldn't mind talking about how your faith has guided you through this period that you describe in the book, and also how that has guided some of your decision making, and also guides the way you think about Canada. I mean, you still, even through all of this, in your book emerges kind of an optimistic view of the future. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind just talking about how your faith ties into all that.
Yeah, you've raised quite a few different points in that question. My background is that I was very profoundly, even though indirectly, marked by the Second World War. My grandparents in the Netherlands suffered through the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. It lasted 5 years. It was very hard, and so I was born in '67, so only 22 years after World War II ended. So really, in the big picture, not long after World War II. And I grew up hearing the stories, and they were profoundly marked by this. But I deeply admire their courage and perseverance in just sticking it out and seeing it through. Times are really hard, and my grandmother once told me, if it wasn't for her faith in God, uh, she she pointed to this high place. She said she would have committed suicide, and it was just very, very hard. And so I'm a student of history, and I think history does go. There's ebbs and flows and waves and ups and downs, and we cannot single-handedly control history. However, um, we owe it to ourselves and to our children, or even if we don't personally have children, we owe it to future generations to do our best to stand up for what is true and right. And
Mhm.
in the short term, it doesn't. It might not pay off in the short run. Some of your viewers and listeners may have heard of the story of Sophie Scholl, who was a teenager who was active in Nazi Germany with the anti-Nazi resistance, which was a life-threatening or life-endangering activity, because if you got caught, you would be executed. And she
Mhm.
and her older brother, they were caught and they were executed for having handed out flyers that the regime disliked. But
Mhm.
okay, so it didn't end well for them personally. But there's just this power that like they stood up for what's true and right, and now we look back 100 years or about 80 years later, and it's like, you know what, Sophie Scholl was right. And so I think that's just our obligation, is to do our best to stand up for truth, speak truth, and fight for justice. And to the extent that you're able to try to not not count the cost. This is not the time or place for a cost benefit analysis, I
Right.
guess.
Right. It's not economics, is it? This is
No.
real. This is real existential stuff. And speaking of being right about a lot of things, you and the JCCF have been right about a lot of things, including about vaccines. That's borne out by the Pfizer dump and a lot of other things. You're right about lockdowns. That's been borne out by the recent report that came out, the Gary Davidson COVID-19 report, that was very damning of many of the things that JCCF was fighting during the pandemic. And also JCCF has, I would say, fed other currents that have really been important. For example, the National Citizens Inquiry. But given all of this, John, these different developments, let's say post pandemic, if we are indeed in a post-pandemic period. It feels like maybe we're still in it. Um, are you disappointed by the lack of change that's come about, even though we now know that really nearly all the things that you were saying and JCCF was saying during the pandemic were true, and that the government was wrong and big media was wrong? It seems like we know a lot more now. We know it was all wrong, but it feels almost like the type of cathartic change that should be happening is not happening. Do you have that same sense, or would you take issue with that?
No, I'm disappointed, and the just this lack of willingness to look at facts, discuss facts, the absence of intellectual honesty, and it is disappointing. And the fanaticism with which some key pillars of the medical establishment are. When Gary Davidson's report came out, 269 pages, very thorough. At least 12 people. There are a lot of other people involved that were not named, but 12 named authors and a whole bunch of other people putting in hundreds of hours of time, possibly thousands of hours, I don't know. And you get this comprehensive 269-page report that covers, there's 9 chapters covering all kinds of different, the performance of the College of Physicians and Surgeons, the hostility towards exploring alternative medicines, the internal coordination, on and on and on. And what do we get? The Alberta Medical Association issues a 68-word statement saying that this 269-page report is anti-science, anti-evidence, misinformation, and the Premier should dismiss the report in its entirety.
Mm.
And I can't prove it one way. I would venture a guess they hadn't even read it. But just, right. How dare you criticize the wisdom of the anointed back in 2020. And so there's a lack of humility, and there's a lack of intellectual honesty, and there's a very sad lack of integrity. If you had integrity, if you had some internal honesty, you would read the report, and there's no obligation to agree with it. They could read all 269 pages and say, you know what? He's right on a few things, but he's wrong on most. Here's why. Here's where he's right. Here's where he's wrong. But instead, it's just this, no, it's anti-science, anti-evidence, misinformation. And then 2 days later, after the AMA statement, we get this Professor Tim Caulfield from the University of Alberta. Mm-hmm. And he authors a letter, and it's more than 68 words. It's 2 pages. He takes issue with 2 aspects of the 269-page report, and has a few footnotes. It's more than 68 words, but it's only 2 pages. And he also says it's anti-science, anti-evidence, it's misinformation. And then he says Premier Daniel Smith should dismiss the 269-page report in its entirety because Tim Caulfield disagreed with 2 of the 9 chapters. It is an astounding arrogance. So it's discouraging. But here's the good news. Okay, if we keep on chipping away at it, right? How does a glacier melt? You don't see it disappearing before your eyes, right? But it's with time. The weather gets warmer, and there's sunshine, and the glacier gradually retreats. And or you got a thick layer of snow on your roof. And there's this, slow melting, and then all of a sudden, whoosh, like a whole bunch of snow comes off all at once. So we got to just keep on plugging away and calling out the Tim Caulfields and the Alberta Medical Associations of the world and saying, hey, why don't you explain why this is disinformation? Can you do that? And just keep on challenging them, and they're going to lose in the end, because truth always vanquishes the lie.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the messages of your book. And one of the things I really like about the book, I like a lot of things about the book. It's very well written, very well documented, but also there is this underlying optimism that comes forth when you talk about these things that unfortunately many people don't share. Not enough of us share that optimism that truth will win out in the end. Professor Caulfield, incidentally, was a recent recipient of the Order of Canada, courtesy of Justin Trudeau. Just as an aside, folks, I want to ask you, John, Uh, I know you knew that, John, but I wanted to ask you now. I've been one of the people who has been an advocate that what we need, certainly in our province, but also nationally, is a full blown public inquiry into COVID 19, into the government's handling of it. The NCI has tried to do, and honestly, uh, they've just, I can't say enough good things about the NCI. But there are problems with that process. And I think we really need a full blown public inquiry, but there's a resistance to that. I'm interested to know, firstly, do you agree with me that that would be a good and useful thing? And secondly, why do you think it isn't happening?
Okay. Well, it's certainly necessary because in the 269-page report of Dr. Gary Davidson, he mentions repeatedly that Alberta Health Services, as well as the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta, were not cooperative and not providing information.
Right.
I don't think he said that they provided no information, but and that's a red flag as well. If you're on the right path, and if you really, if it's government and the public has a right to know about the information, why are you hiding information? If lockdowns and vaccine passports were really scientific and good and just and necessary and life saving, why would you be reluctant in sharing information? So, how do we overcome this? It's like the sunshine on the glacier, just chipping away. We people, the Justice Center sent out an email to all of our to thousands of our donors and supporters in Alberta, and we said, contact your MLA about the Davidson report and urge your MLA to read the report. And but we need a public inquiry to take it to the next level, so that there can be so that Dina Hinshaw or the head of Alberta Health Services, these people can be subpoenaed and forced to testify, and then they can't be stonewalling as what they were during the phase of creating the 269-page report.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hey, folks, we've been talking with John Carpay. He is the author of a wonderful new book called Corrupted by Fear. It's about the COVID-19 pandemic, but it's a different book than many of the books you may have read about COVID-19. It's a fascinating mix of history, of law, of culture, of politics. And so very unique book. In my mind, one of the best books that has yet been written, certainly the best one summarizing what happened legally as a result of the pandemic. It's a number one bestseller on Amazon right now, and we're talking with the author of it, John Carpay. I wonder if I could turn it over to you sort of for the final word. You've written this amazing book, and I hope that you're going to sell many more of them. I'm pleased to learn that it's a bestseller. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. But I know that you read a lot of books. Are there any other books that you would recommend, or sources of information that you would recommend to our viewers and listeners that are perhaps related to this topic, or that impacted you greatly in terms of your development as a thinker and as a lawyer and as an advocate?
That's that's a tough one to answer on the spur of the moment because I've read quite a few books. The first one that comes to mind is by Matthias Desmet, called "The Psychology of Totalitarianism."
Yeah.
It is just brilliant. It is relevant. It is timely, and he is a professor from Ghent University in northern Belgium, and
Mhm.
was one of the minority of academics to see through lockdowns. And he talks about mass formation and mass psychology and so on. So, Psychology of Totalitarianism is a great book. And then
Yeah.
Francis Widdowson briefly is going to be. We're having three dinners: June 12th in Toronto, August the 15th in Vancouver, and then September 19th in Calgary. Dr. Francis Widdowson will be at all three dinners, and she's an amazing woman, a very worthy recipient of this award. Prior recipients include Dr. Jordan Peterson, Ezra Levant, Tamara Leach, Christy Blatchford, Mark Stein, and so if you live in Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, or happen to be passing through one of those cities at the right time, you can get tickets on our website, www.jccf.ca.
Yeah, well, that's great. And yes, the Desmond book really is an incredible work. I understand that he was about to release another one. He really takes Hannah Arendt's work to another level, doesn't he? In a lot of ways, and this idea of propaganda and how damaging it can be, and wow, it's hard to imagine a more deeper application of those principles than the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, yeah, great selection. Appreciate that very much, John. We appreciate you and all of the work that you do, that you have done, and you continue to do on behalf of all Canadians. You and the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and Charter of Advocates, all of the excellent lawyers there. But your book really is a blessing. I enjoyed reading it. I think it's an important work. I think it belongs in the university. I would like to see young law students reading this book in class. I think it would be very, very educational. I doubt that they're learning anything about any of the important cases that the JCCF has been doing. But I have a feeling that in time, these cases are going to form a very important part of Canadian jurisprudence. And so your role in that, I think, as time goes on, is going to be even more significant. And it's great that your book documents all of this in such a cogent and persuasive and readable way. So thank you for producing this book. And also, thanks very much for being our special guest here on Grey Matter today. It's been a pleasure having you on the program.
Well, the honor is mine. Honor to have been invited, and look forward to speaking with you again, Leighton.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the second book.
It's in my head, but I need to type it out. But it's kind of in there already.
I know.
Oh yeah.
I know it's a lot of work, and you've got a lot going on, but I know it's coming, and I'm looking forward to it. Thanks very much, John.
Thank you.